Anne Goldstein has been an editor and the head of copy desk at New Yorker magazine. She worked for the magazine for over 40 years. She has translated works of famous Italian writers like Elena Ferrante and Paolo Pasolini. She is the editor of the complete works of Primo Levi, an Italian writer in English. She is the winner of Pen Renato Poggioli Prize and awards from the Italian Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the American Academy of Arts and Letters. She was the panel chair for translated fiction at the US National Book Award in 2022. In this episode, she spoke about her stint at the New Yorker, her works of translation, translator's identity, and the Italian writer Marina Jarre, whose Italian novel she translated into English as Distant Fathers. Thank you very much for coming over to our podcast.
Thank you for having me.
To begin with, you studied ancient Greek in college. I just want to understand, was there any from your family side for your interest in your languages? Was there any early influence?
No, I mean, my first languages were actually Latin and French that I studied in elementary school. And I really liked, I loved Latin and I liked French, and I was good at them. There was no real family issue about it. I mean, no family interest particular, but I just was, I liked them and I was good at them. And then I studied Greek in college. Yeah. And then I didn't start learning Italian till I was in my late 30s, actually.
Can you tell us a bit about it? Why did you learn Italian?
I was interested in Italian for a long time because I read Dante, the Divine Comedy, in college. And actually, there was a Dante class that I took twice because I was so taken with Dante.
Okay.
And I always had this ambition to read Dante in Italian. And so at a certain point when I was working at the New Yorker, I convinced some of my colleagues that they also wanted to read Dante. and one of them knew someone who could teach us Italian. So we had an Italian class at the office. And then we read the whole Divine Comedy. I mean, it took us a long time, but we did it.
So you enjoyed Dante more in Italian or in English?
No, I mean, of course it's beautiful. It's just much more beautiful in Italian. You can't. There's no way you could translate everything. I mean, like all poetry. I mean, poetry in particular, I think, doesn't translate all that well.
Now, then, how did your journey into translation begin?
Well, when I'd been studying Italian, I guess our class had been going for about 4 or 5 years. The editor of the New Yorker, Robert Gottlieb, received a book from the artist Saul Steinberg, who was you probably know he's the person he's famous for the New York, and then the rest of the world is little. Anyway, he had a friend named Aldo Buzzi, and he gave this book to Bob, and who didn't really read Italian. So he gave me the book and said, "Can you just look at this because I have to say something to Saul?" So I read it. I really loved it, and I just, for the hell of it, I tried translating it. And then the book was published. I mean, first it was actually published in the New Yorker. It was a short book, and then it was published as part of a book. So that's like everybody else. I mean, most translators I know, got their start by accident.
Okay. So then how was the response for your first translated work?
Yeah, there was a good response. I mean, yeah, people liked it. I mean, it's a very particular kind of work because it's really about, it's very literary, and it's kind of about the Italian concept of Russia, the relationship between Italy and Russia, which is actually very close, or has been. But it was really kind of a meditation on that. So it wasn't. I mean, I don't think that it was like zillions of people read it, but it's a really wonderful book. I don't know if you've read it, and it's very. Or the Chekhov and Sandrio part the book itself has some other stuff in it too, but Aldo Mucci was a very particular kind of writer.
Now, you had a very long stint at the New Yorker magazine, both as a head of the copy desk and also as a senior editor, spanning for almost 5 decades, I guess, 4.5 decades. Yeah.
Yeah, I yeah.
Mhm. Can you share some insights into these roles? And can you narrate some interesting experiences you had with famous writers? And
Yeah, I mean, people. Well, I guess I'll start with just the magazine itself. I mean, I wasn't really I was the head of the department from about 1987 when the editors changed. Um, but copy editing was really important at the New Yorker, and there was a very complex process of fact checking and copy editing. And I'm not going to go into it in detail, but anyway, that was so copy was important, which it seems to be, not to sound like an old crabby old lady, but it seems to be less and less important to everybody. No, I'm not talking about the New Yorker. I'm just saying in general. Um, but anyway, I mean, I don't, I did edit John Updike I edited John Updike's book reviews for a while, quite a few years, I guess. And the thing about John Updike is that, and all great writers, is that they really like editing. They don't see it as adversarial. And sometimes young writers do see it. They see that, it's like you're the teacher and you're correcting them, when in fact, the idea is that that you're really trying to help them to be themselves as far as possible on the page. And Updike was always very appreciative of, of queries, of suggestions. Even if he didn't agree, he appreciated that, the level of attention in a way. I mean, I think that leads into the relationship between editing or copy editing and translation.
yeah,
Because translation requires a similar kind of, I don't know, you could say devotion to the writer or devotion to the prose, and attention to detail, attention to the words, and the goal of expressing that writer or letting that writer express him or herself as well as possible in English, and as close to and maintaining that voice as much as you can. So, yeah.
in one of your interviews, I read about your experience with Ved Mehta.
Well, when I first came to the New Yorker, actually, I guess it was when Ved came to the New Yorker. And in case people don't know, he was blind, but he was a writer, and he was blind, and he had really done amazing things. I mean, he had come from India and gone to the blind school on his own. He really, it was incredible. Anyway, but I guess he was a friend of. Somehow he was introduced to Mr. Shawn and hired as a writer, and the New Yorker always had hired an assistant for him, who would. And his method of writing was that the book I worked on with him was a biography of Gandhi, or a book about Gandhi, and so he had read various things, and he would have people read to him. He had people reading to him all the time, and then if there was something he wanted to make notes of, I guess they would copy it down. I guess that's what we did. Anyway, then when he wrote, he would say a sentence. You would write down the sentence in longhand. This is way before computers. He would. It sounds so primitive. And then he would, you'd read it back to him, and he would either say, "Okay, let's go on," or he would, revise it or something. So it was a pretty laborious process, and he wore out a lot of people. because I mean, for with reason, he was quite difficult to work with, um, because he was very focused. He didn't like to have any other sound. Like if you threw a piece of paper in the wastebasket, he could hear that, and he would say, "Don't do that," or whatever. Anyway, it was very intense kind of work, but it was kind of amazing.
Yeah. Okay. Now, as the chief of editor for a New Yorker, you must have had a very demanding workload, right?
Hmm. Yeah,
How did you find time for translation?
to tell you the truth, I don't know. I mean, I used to work. I worked on. I worked at night when I came home, or actually, worked more in the early morning and before work, and then I also worked on weekends. And then I would take a month's vacation every year and go to Italy and work in Italy. And my boss was agreeable, fortunately, to that.
Okay. Now, do you believe that editing the work of others had any impact on how you approached translation?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of as I said, the idea of getting the writer to of you yourself transferring the writer's voice into another language. I think that it's similar to making the writer's voice better in English or clearer in English. And it's also, it is kind of a painstaking thing because you have to consider every word. And if you're editing something, you do have to consider every word as well. So, and I just think the discipline of editing, uh, and the invisibility of editing is similar to that of the translator. If you're an editor, you're used to being invisible. I mean, we can discuss this later. The greater visibility of translators perhaps now, but you don't go into it because you want your name on in lights, kind of.
But as an editor, you must have had fights with authors, right? Same is with authors while you are translating.
Yeah, it's a negotiation.
Okay.
um, yeah, yeah. I try to avoid real fights.
Okay. Um, See, in the last 4.5 decades or so, could you see any changes in the way you approach translations, either in terms of philosophy, workflow, or craft?
Well, the biggest change is when I started. Yes, there were computers, but there was not Google. There was not the access to so much information
Right,
as there is now, which makes it a lot easier. I mean, like there are there's so many dictionaries online, and there's so many other sources of things. I mean, when you're translating, you have to look up a lot of things. There's a lot of things, not just words that you have to look up, but cultural. There's all kinds of references, historical references, cultural references, food reference. I mean, everything, every possible type of reference. And so it's really helpful to have a computer to be able to look these things up. Not that you always find them, but there's just things like Google Street View. All these things are really useful that certainly didn't exist when I started.
so when you are translating the fiction, would you like to have a feel of the place too? You want to see how it is?
Absolutely, yeah, yeah. It really helps. I mean, like it's the best thing is to actually go to see a place, in person. But if you can't do that, you can look at pictures of it.
Right.
You can look at maps. I mean, I spend a lot of time looking at maps. um, there's just a lot of there. You have more options now. But the best thing is to be in a place, or to look at. I mean, I've translated a lot, somehow a lot of books about that have Rome as a background or as a setting, and I've always made it a project really to see all the places that are in the books that I'm working on. I mean, as far as they still exist.
Right. Right.
And I just find it really, really helpful, even if it's not literally helpful, even if it's not like, oh, well, this is the right color, this is the right word, just to have a feeling of the place. Like the book that's coming out, there's a book coming out in the fall called The City of the Living. Wait, what is it called? Yeah, City of the Living, by a writer called Nicola LaGioia.
Right.
And it's about a murder, and the murder takes place in this suburb of Rome called Colatino. So I went to to this place just so I could, see the building and and just get a sense of the atmosphere of the neighborhood. And I just found that so helpful.
I believe you know
So,
more about those places than the author himself or herself.
well, probably not, but no.
Now that you are full time into translation,
Mm-hmm.
what is your typical workday like?
Oh, it's kind of varied, but my goal of a typical work day is to work. I'm usually working on more than one thing at once, which isn't sometimes is good and sometimes isn't good.
Why is that? Why do you take up two, three projects at a time?
I don't know. Because it's just things. I agree to do projects, and then something takes longer or something intervenes, and so I just end up having usually more than one thing. Or for example, when I was working on Primo Levi, that was such a long-term project that it was possible to be also doing something else. Or I don't know. I mean, I don't know if if I should have, but I did. And I actually find that it's kind of useful to have two different kinds of Italian in my head, because sometimes you just it just helps you understand something. Something you read in one book helps you understand something in the other book, like a word or a phrase or many things. So I that's my justification.
Yeah. Now, when it comes to evaluating translations, you have been a judge on several panels to select the best translated works.
Oh yeah.
How do you evaluate a particular translation?
Well, I mean, I really it's you can't really divide it from judging a good book. I mean, you can, but it's hard because of course when you're judging a contest, you're judging books from languages that you don't necessarily know. And even with the ones you're not looking at the original. At least in the ones that I mean, some contests are different, but in the ones that the type of awards that I've judged, which is only two, I think, two or three, you're just looking at the English version, and if it's sometimes you can tell if the translation is a little sloppy, or well, you can tell, or you can tell that it reads really well in English. Sometimes you can see, oh yeah, I can see, even if you don't know the language, you can say, oh, you can see how a translator might have solved something. Even if you don't exactly know, you say, oh, this is a really good, way to do this. But really, you're judging a book, the whole thing, the style, the language, the writing, the style. Yeah, I don't know. It's a little bit. I guess it's a little bit tricky.
Okay. Even recently, you were the panel chair for translated fiction at the US National Book Award
Yeah,
in 2022, right?
yeah.
So, in the last 4.5 decades that you are in the field of translation, have you observed any changes in terms of craft, reach, and recognition for the translator?
Well, I think in the last, I mean, I don't really, I'm not somebody who really looks at the overview of things, but but in the past few years, I mean, there's been a lot. Even though the numbers are the same, I believe the numbers of the percentage of translated books, at least in America, are the same, and maybe in Great Britain, I don't know. Um, I think that there's been greater visibility to translation given to translations and actually to translators. I mean, there's a big Jennifer Crofts, the translator of Olga Tokarczuk, has this this has a real campaign to have translator names on the covers. Many publishers won't do it. They just won't do it.
Even today?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah,
Okay.
even today. Yeah. Not naming any names, but a lot of people they just have that's just their policy and they don't want to change it. I mean, I think gradually it is changing the concept that the translator shouldn't be on the cover, and more translators are on the covers. I mean, their name is on the cover, but just in general, I think there's a more attention is being paid to translated works, and many more languages are being translated. I think, like not just, I mean, just to take India, not just Hindi, but like tons of smaller language groups are being translated, and I think it's really great that that there's all more African languages. Um, so in that way, I think that there's been a change.
What is your personal take on this recognition for the translator?
I think translators should be recognized. I do. I think for me, the thing that sometimes annoys me, when a translated book is reviewed, or not annoys, but I notice this when a translated book is reviewed and the reviewer quotes big chunks of the from the book, big chunk, like a paragraph or more than that, or phrase, whatever, from the book, and they talk about the style of the writer rather than mentioning, of course, this is the work of the translator, not of the writer. That's unfortunate. I think that they don't. I mean, it doesn't matter, but it's because you want the book to be. I guess. Well, if they're saying something good, you want the book to be praised. But I think that there's not. It's just like a blind spot of some sort. But I think the whole issue of reviewing translations is complicated because, there's arguments that only a person who knows the original language should do it, and there are arguments that nobody, the person who knows the original language shouldn't do it. There's a famous editor, I don't know if you know her, called Barbara Epler at New Directions. She doesn't know any other language, and yet she's been editing translations, so successfully for years. So there's, and she feels that that's helpful to her, not to know the other languages. I mean, the languages so it can work both ways.
How do you choose a book for translation?
Well, for me, my case, I've almost always been asked by a publisher. I haven't really chosen that many. I don't think I've chosen really. Maybe. Well, one book that I did read on my own and wanted to translate, the publisher had also, we were a meeting of minds about this book. So really, I've been mostly been asked by publishers.
If there is any spare time for you, do you do anything to enhance your translation skills?
Well, I think that reading is really the best way. I mean, reading in English. And I used to always, I don't know, I haven't done it lately. Well, yeah, actually I have. When I usually spend a month or so in Italy every year. Well, before the pandemic, I spent more time, but I'm working up to it again. But I always used to, when I would go to Italy and work, and I always used to bring some, like a 19th century English novel or some book that was of an English prose style that I liked, just so I would have English in my ear while I was working, because you get confused sometimes. So I do think it's good to read. I mean, it's good to read other books in Italian, but it's also good to be reading something in English that's well written.
Books that you have translated. One of them is, of course, the prestigious project where you won Guggenheim Fellowship for translating Primo Levi. Can you provide more details about this fellowship project to translate Primo Levi?
Yeah. Well, the fellowship was really a byproduct, but there was an editor at the publishing house, Norton, Norton Liverite, called Robert Weil, and he had the vision, the idea of publishing all of Primo Levi in English. And because his books had been, most of his books were translated, but not everything. And they were very scattered. They were different translators. They were different publishers. And he thought that they should all be put together. And originally, he spent 5 years getting the English rights, so you can imagine how scattered they were. And originally, we were going to just put together the existing translations. At least there would be one volume with all, or actually, as it turned out, 3 volumes with all the works. But when I started reading them, they were so varied. It didn't really make sense that if we're going to do this project, we really should just retranslate everything. So we did get permission to retranslate everything, except for If This Is a Man, which is the first major book, Se Questo è un uomo, which is called in English usually it's called Survival in Auschwitz. We're trying to get away from that. So we did that. I mean, it was a bit of a struggle, but and this project went on for like 11 years, I think, before it was 10 or 11 years. Well, it was a lot of books, and there were different translators. It was a little bit complicated. And then we had, I worked a lot with the Primo Levi Center in Torino, in Turin. They were really helpful, and they have a scholar, Domenico Scarpa, and he did the notes, and he helped with other questions and things. So it's kind of a it's kind of a great scholarly volume. I mean, semi-scholarly. It's not meant to be academic. Yeah, so that was quite an operation.
Yeah, recently I got this book, The Periodic Table, just a few days ago. Now I read some of the chapters. It is full of chemistry terminology. Lot of it talks about elements, and it compares with the personality and all that.
Yeah.
How did you manage that? These technical terms. How did you manage the translation?
Well, Levi was a scientist, obviously, and so there was a lot of science, actually. The internet was very helpful. But also, I had a friend who was a scientist, and I could check things with him. And some stuff, I don't know. I guess I probably no. I mean, you can look up a lot of things, and it was possible. It's hard because you don't want to use a term that people wouldn't. That scientists sometimes the dictionary, of course, doesn't always give you the word the that's used. It gives you a definition, but it's not really or a word that's not common. Also, slight P.S. Most Italian English dictionaries are British, so you always have to make them into American.
There were about 9 translators working in that project.
Yeah, I forget 8 or 9. Yeah.
Yeah. And how was the experience of editing the other translators' work?
Well, I think it was actually pretty smooth. I mean, most of them were people that I knew, and we got along, and they knew that I was trying to. I mean, they of course every book wasn't going to sound the same, but I wanted to have at least some kind of ground rules and some kind of tone that was similar, or tone and style that were similar between the books. And I think that sort of worked out well. Obviously, I edited all of them. I read them. I checked them against the original. I think. I tried. So I think it went pretty well.
Now we will come to Elena Ferrante's works.
Oh, yes.
The first book that you translated was The Days of Abandonment.
Yeah.
How did you come to translate it?
Well, the publisher, Europa Editions, that was the first book that they published, and the Europa is the child. The parent company is an Italian publisher called Edizioni AO, and they decided to the owner, Sandro Ferri, and Sandra decided to start publishing, to start an English language publishing house. And the first book that they were going to publish was The Days of Abandonment, which they had published in Italian. And they they had a little contest.
Okay.
And they had like 5 translators do a sample.
Oh.
They just got my name, I think, from the Penn website. And I won that contest. I since discovered some of the people who didn't win the contest are close friends of mine. But that was really, it was really a chance, sort of, again, kind of accidental. But once I started, I just kept going with Elena Ferrante.
Can you describe the writer Elena Ferrante both as a reader and a translator?
Yeah, but I mean, it's really hard to say what you are as a reader, because as a translator, you're reading in such a different way, you know. I mean, I have an idea of Elena Ferrante as the writer of her books, even though I don't have an idea of her as a person. I mean, to me, the person is the writer of the books. So it's in the story and the language and the what she writes about. I don't know. I think I don't know really how to answer that, I guess.
No, in terms of style, you must have read a lot of other writers too, not only in Italian, even in English and all. How do you
Yeah.
compare her style of writing and the themes that she chooses? What do you think of her as a writer?
Well, I think she's a great writer. I mean, I think that she I think that her style matches what she's doing in a way. I mean, I think that she's talking about, obviously she's talking about women's emotions. She's talking about men too, but she's talking about women, basically women in relation to all their relationships. I mean, women and mothers, women and daughters, women and sons, women and husbands, lovers, whatever. And then her style of writing is she kind of piles things on. The sentences are kind of famously run-on sentences. I tried to preserve some of that, but English doesn't really like run-on sentences, so I had to stop them here and there. But yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I mean, she's really has she sort of digs into the experience of women in the world, women in all these different situations, and she goes into the things that are not even that nice. I mean, that are pretty, that we don't like to think about in ourselves. And I think that's, not so usual.
Now, the Neapolitan series has sold more than 1 million copies.
Uh huh.
As a literary work, what do you attribute its success to?
Well, I think it's, I'm sort of touching on that before that. There's something about the way she writes about relationships and including one's relationship to oneself that kind of struck a chord with a lot of people. I mean, mostly women, but not only women. That people
Yeah.
recognize themselves in. Obviously, not everybody. We didn't all grow up in Naples, in a poor neighborhood in Naples in the 1950s and 60s and 70s and
Right.
80s and 90s. But I think that a lot of the emotional situations that she describes are familiar to people. I once went to this, I guess didn't give a talk, but went to a book club meeting, and the book club was the United Nations Book Club, and there were women from all over the world, and it was amazing. They had all read this book, and they had all related to it. It was mostly UN people who were UN wives, basically. Uh, but they all, or maybe even some people, or people who work there. I don't know. But they really, it was so international, and they all had felt an emotional connection to these books. So I think that sort of says something about it. But I don't know. It's hard to know. There's something about the combination of her. They're very. She says in an interview, I think in the Paris Review, she said she uses every kind of writing that she needs or that she wants. And so there's a lot of plot, there's a lot of emotion, there's a bit of soul searching, there's a lot of trouble, mistakes. So I think that all that goes into the fact that to making them making people want to read them.
She is an anonymous writer so far,
Yeah.
till now. How do you collaborate with her while translating her books? How do you communicate with her if you choose to?
Well, the thing is that I've worked with in quotes a lot of dead writers, so I'm kind of used to the absent writer. I mean, I don't,
Right.
Really, my experience is much more not working with a writer than working with a writer.
Right.
With her, if I have had questions, I write. The editors are the people of Edizione EO in Rome are the people that are in touch with her. So if I have questions, I write to them, and they write to her, and then they let me know. It's a little cumbersome, but there's not, it works pretty well.
The next one is a hypothetical question. If you were to meet Elena Ferrante in person, what might happen?
I have no idea. I would be so, I think I would be so in awe of her that I wouldn't be able to say a word. I'd be worried about whether my Italian was correct.
Now, we will come to your recent book that you translated, ma'am, The Distant Fathers.
Mm-hmm.
It's a memoir of an Italian writer, Marina Jarre.
Yeah. Yes.
Could you please introduce Distant Fathers and explain what particular aspect of this book led you to take up its translation?
Well, I was asked by the editor of New Vessel. He Yeah, he acquired the book. He heard about it, and I forgot how. Oh yes, I know. He heard about it anyway. He wanted to publish it, and he asked me to translate it. And it seemed interesting, so I said yes. And it's kind of an amazing book. I think she's a wonderful writer, and I don't think she's very. That book didn't really get a lot of attention. And there's also a sequel to it called Return to Latvia, which is also really interesting. But it's a memoir, but it's very, it's almost like stream of consciousness, but it's a very contained stream of consciousness. The first part, there are three parts. The first part is really about her childhood. The second part is about her adolescence, and the third part is about her being an adult. But she's an interesting character because her father was a Latvian Russian Jew, and her mother was Piedmontese, but she was a Waldensian, which is a Protestant, basically Protestant sect not sect. They're Protestants who live in the Piedmont area of Italy, which is unusual. She spent her first 10 years in Riga. Then her parents had a very acrimonious divorce, and her mother took her and her daughter her and her sister sort of stole them away, and they grew up with their grandmother in Italy. So that was sort of her background.
And interestingly, the mother of Jarre is Clara Coisen. She is a translator too.
Yeah, she was a translator from Russian into Italian, I believe.
In Distant Fathers, the themes of childhood and adolescence is present. So similar to Elena Ferrante's novels in some way.
Yeah.
How do you compare their writing styles in this context?
Well, I would say that Distant Fathers is more of a kind of stream of consciousness. As I said, it's not like literally stream of consciousness, but it's kind of stream of consciousness. One thing leads to another, and it's not necessarily chronological. Although it's very hard. It's sort of a book that you don't really understand until you get to the end, and then you want to read it again. But I mean that, like, in the first section, it's sort of jumps back and forth, but basically all within her childhood. Whereas although Ferrante does play around with chronology a bit, especially in the beginning, in the first novel of the first Neapolitan novel, it's also kind of straightforward. The story is straightforward, much more straightforward than in Jarre. You sort of have to work things out a little bit in Marina Jarre, and it's just a more kind of a dreamier kind of writing. I think I would say. I don't know.
Yeah, it's. I read the book. I read the book actually. Recently, I read the book before the interview. Yeah, a couple of days ago.
Did you like it?
Yeah, I liked it.
Did you like it?
Yeah, yeah, I liked it. Yes, yes.
Yeah, it's not an easy book to read.
Stream of consciousness books. I believe it's always like that for me, at least.
Yeah, yeah,
But the prose and the way she, I would say you describe certain things. It's really beautiful. It's really worked out well in the translation.
yeah. Oh, thank you. Yeah. Well, the other book is about the one that came out after that, Return to Latvia, is about her father, who was killed by the Nazis. It's also it's different. It's quite different, but I also like that. It's also very. I mean, it's about the Holocaust, but it's good. It's good.
In fact, you translated other memoir, that is Jhumpa Lahiri's In Other Words. Yeah, that was very interesting project. Yeah, could you share your experience with that particular project?
Well, first of all, I was surprised by it. I thought, why doesn't I thought she should maybe translate her own book. No, I don't mean it in that way. I just mean, I knew that I couldn't be Jhumpa Lahiri on the page in English. I mean, I'm not. I mean, also it's a different kind of a book. It's about, well, you read it. It's about learning Italian. It's not a complex. It's not complex. Although it gets more complex as her Italian gets more complex, it gets better. But it wasn't. So it wasn't like a difficult in the sense of the sentences or the structure, but it was difficult because I didn't know what she would, like, take. If a word could have two or three different meanings. I mean, the same meaning in different shades of meaning. And I would choose what I thought was right, and then maybe she would. Then when she read she might change it, which was fine. I didn't, it wasn't like she was correcting me, but she just, she maybe chose a different word, which makes sense because she's the writer and she knows what she wants, which kind of nuance she wants to bring to a word. In a way, it was kind of a strange, kind of stressful. I think after that I think when she wrote a novel in Italian and she translated that herself. I think her original idea was that she didn't want to she thought she would rewrite the book if she herself translated it, and she didn't want to do that. So I haven't read both versions of the novel, so I don't really know how it came out in English and how it came out in Italian.
We have come to the last couple of questions. Which of your translated works gave you the greatest pleasure, and for what reason?
It's really a hard question to answer because I like every book. You learn something from every book you translate, even if you're not that fond of it. But almost every book I at the same time, when you're translating a book, you become very fond of it. The Neapolitan novels that was an amazing thing to do. The Marina Jarre I really loved. I'm translating an author now called Alba de Cespedes that I also really like. Primo Levi, there's nothing, that was an amazing thing to do, to work on Primo Levi. So I guess I really can't answer that question.
Okay. Now I gather that you spend a lot of time on reading books too, other than the ones you translate. What are you currently reading? And
Well, I just finished this very interesting book called The Expendable Man by a woman called Dorothy Hughes, which is a noir kind of reissued by New York Review Books. It's from 1963, and it's very good. If you like noir, type of things. The writing is so good. It's really good. But I also recently read this huge series of books called the Cazalet Chronicles by Elizabeth Jane Howard from, I guess, the 50s, 60s, 70s. There's like there's about 5 volumes about an English family in the 1930s, 40s, and 50s, and that's really good.
You have any favorite themes that you read often, or any favorite writers?
Yeah, I mean, I like 19th century novels. I read Trollope all the time.
Okay. Any specific writers that you read, or
Yeah, I mean, like Anthony Trollope. Who else? I don't know. Who else do I read over again? I don't know.
lastly, do you have any suggestions for individuals who aspire to pursue a career in translation?
Well, the first thing is you need to have a day job because you cannot make a living as a translator.
Right, right, right.
That's really the main thing. I mean, that's something going back to the question about, if things have changed. I mean, yes, the pay's gotten better, but it hasn't gotten that better, um, compared to the time that you work. I think to really support yourself as a translator, you would have to scramble pretty hard. So you really need to have a job that supports you. I used to say that my job at the New Yorker supported my translation habit.
Okay, okay. Craft wise and other than this.
Well, I mean, I think that reading is really important. Reading in English is really important, and I think lots of times people forget that the important thing is not so much. I mean, you have to know the language you're translating from, but you have to know the language you're translating into even better, because that's what you're really a writer in that language. So I think that should be emphasized.
Right. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you very much for your patience and giving us your time. It's been a real honor to have you with us today. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you.